recording on this computer. All right, so new site 5. What do we do in new site 5? We wired up a login page. We were able to create articles in new site 5, right?
Yes.
Yep. And wired up like a makeshift login page and some other things. New site 6, we're going to wire up the login page. So when an actual user logs in, it's going to make a post request to the server, and the server is going to look into that database for that user based off of their username or password or their email and password, and send it back saying like, hey, this user is authenticated, and it's going to send back specifically an access token with that response. Then we're also going to modify the app.nav, the app nav component to show a login page or a login button if the user is not logged in. And then once a user logs in, that button's going to switch to a log out button so that user can log out. In addition, so usually you can't make posts or make articles or create an article if a user is not logged in. So we're going to also add that functionality as well. So only a logged in user can actually add an article to our database. So with that, it's a good transition because with Ronnie's presentation kind of coincides with today a little bit. So let's just sort of talk about authentication. Generally, so when a user logs in to Facebook, to pretty much any login application, a post request goes to some API, so some API endpoints such as like API/authenticate, and in the body of that request is the username or password, and it shoots that off to the server over here. And then the server checks if the username and password are correct. And if so, then the server responds with the username and password, or the username, as well as an access token or a token. And this token is an alphanumeric long string that is stored in the database for a certain amount of time. So the token and the user is logged in. We can store that token in the web browser in some capacity, or we can just store it in state in our React state. So the next time, so it stores the token, state, or local storage. We generally don't want to store it in local storage, but I just have it there just because I know we've seen local storage before, but you generally don't want to store a token in local storage because as we discussed earlier with Ronnie's workshop, you can do cross-site scripting and inject JavaScript and access that local storage and access that token, and now you can authenticate it. An attacker can authenticate you as a user and do some bad things. But there's like cookies, there's session storage, there's all different kinds of web browser storage that you can store that token in. And so if a user is signed in, the user has additional functionality in the application, such as adding an article. So when a user goes to actually add an article, we add another header element called authorization, and we include our token in the header of that post request. And when we send that post request to the server parses through, it looks in the header, and it's like, oh, here's the authorization, here's that token value. Let's check to see if that token is still a valid token. And so it's like, hey, this is an actual user because it has a valid token. And so we are allowed to post to the database. And then we just kind of respond with a success for adding an article. Does anybody have any questions on kind of that process when a user signs in?
Well, I know one side was we learned in Django they had the CSR, the form token. So would we potentially be using two if we're, I know this is React where I guess we don't necessarily have the form token, but if we were to integrate Django, is that something we'd have to account for too?
No, because React already has that built into that kind of authentication built into it. So we don't use an CSRF token, but this is outside. This is just to authenticate a user, not necessarily authenticate a form. So this token is specific to that user. So when a user has an authenticated token or has been authenticated on the app, we send that token with any post requests or any updates or any time we're writing to a server.
And then you mentioned something about a time response. Is there something that we set up in the server that can, let's say, time out if there's no other requests within, let's say, 10 minutes? So if nobody, if they don't make any actual thing, it kind of automatically expires the token?
You can do that manually. You'd have to set that up on the server side or on the server. But there's also tokens that just live for a certain amount of time, regardless of how much activity has been on. So it's like, hey, this token is only valid for 30 days. And then after that, those 30 days, it automatically, you have to like reset and the user is no longer authenticated and you have to log back in. But you can have some of those tokens. So for example, when you do a password reset and you get an email saying, hey, click this link is only available, or you only have like 10 minutes to update your password, or else this link is no longer valid. It stores a token on the server, and when you click that link, it has like, it's usually the link has like a bunch of alphanumeric characters in it. It checks against the server to see if that alphanumeric character is still in the database and if it's still valid. So it checks of whether or not it's expired or not. And if it is expired, obviously that link is no longer valid. And then so you'd have to like click reset your password again and like regenerate a new link. So that's like one example of where that's used. All right. So when a client tries to authenticate or logs in and sends their username and password to the server, the server responds with a 200 success if the user exists. And this is what the server kind of responds back with in our app. So this is specific to new site 6. In different applications, it can look differently, but it has a created date or created at time. This is the actual token that is being sent through to authenticate the user. We have this TTL. This is time to live. So this is how long that this token will live for. So if you divide, I don't know what that equals. I don't know if it's 30 days or something like that, but it's a certain number of minutes. Then it actually sends the user object back, and then the username and ID. So it's, yeah. So, and then when the user is authenticated, they now have the ability to add an article. So when I decide to add an article, I fill out the form, I click submit a new article. I send the token in the API in the body, in addition to like the article object, the title, the byline, and the abstract. I also send the token. And then in the headers of that post request, I add another key authorization and I add that token in there. And then I also have the actual article object that I JSON stringify. And so when I comes to the server, it checks to see if this token is a valid token. If it is, I'm able to save it to the database. So does anybody have any questions about that right now? We're about to jump right into it. All right. So single page application, I already get cloned. New site, let's actually code. Let's open that into a new window. So initial setup, I get cloned, new site 6. You have to copy over your entire source folder from new site 5. After copying over your source directory, we want to run npm run update app. This command will update a few unit tests in your source directory. Once you've performed the steps, run npm install and run npm run start. I already did all that because it takes a little time. So I've already git cloned. I've copied over my source folder right here. I updated, I npm installed, and now I can npm run start right here. Right here. Whoop. npm run start. I just want to make sure my app is still working. Hopefully it is. All right. Now it's loading, starting the development server. Takes a long time. Come on. So while I get that going, so we're going to utilize a single type of object model from the, so we have a user's API login function now. So before we were using the articles API, now we're going to be using a user's API, which has a login method, which logs in a user. So in today's challenge, we'll be dealing with a new model, the user. Well, it's not required or considered helpful to make a separate JavaScript module for interacting with different models of data that APIs can return. So separate your specific APIs. Anything that has to do with articles is going to have its own articles API file. Anything that deals with users, we're going to have a user's API file. So inside the user's API module, we should create a function login. The login function accepts parameters called credential object. The structure of the credential object that this function should accept should look like this. So an email and password. So here's my current news site 6, copied over from news site 5. Just want to make sure everything works. Cool, we got that. We got Nostrum. So we have that working. We have every opinion world, national section, business. We can go to a login page. I can say tom@email.com, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever that was, 1, 2, 3, and submit. It's a dummy. It doesn't do anything yet. This is all just dummy, kind of just set state. Let's look at it, what it looks like. Pages, login page. So just like when Ronnie was saying, like, hey, you shouldn't just set state to true whether the user's Batman is logged in, like the Batman user. Here, this is exactly what we're doing, and that's not really good. So right now I'm setting the login to true. And I have some conditional rendering is logged in, say login. Otherwise, when the user is logged in, show this. Hi username. So right here, hi Tom Preet, and I've got a little log out that logs the user out. I can still post articles, article 1, article 2, article, abstract 1, byline. I just want to make sure everything works. I can send it. All right, okay. So now it says I can't post an article. That's right, because I'm on news site 6, I need to have an authenticated user. So I've got to have some error handling on the back end. It says post, articles, unauthorized. Let's look at the error code on authorization required, error. So let's actually look at our APIs, in our article API. If I go down here, I have this add article that has some error messages, that has some error handling right here, and this is the error message. If I do succeed, it'll post right here. Does anybody have any questions about the app so far? All right. So let's go to here, the user's API login. Let's go over here. So here's my user's API login. I'm going to split that. So my user's API login right here is called a post request should be made to HTTP localhost 3001 API users, login, include users, and the credentials object should be stringified and passed into the body. I'm going to cancel that. Let's run this specific test spec right here in the users API, clear, and let's zoom in. There we go. So if I do npm run, is it test users API dot test JS? So it's like, all right. Oh, what happened? Did it not work? I just run npm test. Uh-oh. Did I not run update? So error npm error test failed. Let's just run test to see if the tests run. Huh, that's weird. Well, the test isn't running right now, but let's see if we can get this to work. So when a user logs in, a post request should be made to the local host right here. So with that, how should we write this? Should we do the login page first and send the API to here? Or should we do the user's API first, or wire up the login page to send the user's credentials to the user's API? Does anybody have a preference?
If I were doing it, I'd be doing the user's API first. That way I know exactly what I need to send and what I'm expecting back.
Okay. So the user's API, this is the actual endpoint we're sending it to. So we can do let response equals, let's do an async await. Fetch, I'm sending that. Whoop. I need to send to this API endpoint. And then it says also the credentials should be stringified and passed in the request body. And the content type should be set to application JSON. The function should return a fetch promise that will resolve later. So in addition to that, in comma, we can send in some headers. We do, was it content type? Application JSON. And what kind of method is this? So it's a post request, post. And then inside the body, we can JSON stringify this credential object. All right.
You have to await.
Thank you. I need to await. And then let's just console log this response. Why isn't the test running? Package JSON. I just don't want to deal with it right now. All right. Well, I think that works for right now. I'm just going to have this console logged right now. And so when I actually wire up the login page, I can see whether or not that response is what I need it to be. If I had that test working, it would tell me whether it would be working or not. So we'll see what that looks like. All right. So right here, it's like once we get this back, we'll come back to this part. Handle login. So let's just skip down to here right now, because once we come back, we'll look at this. This is the expected return of that response. So you'll want to call the API login from the login page.js, but you will need to store the response object in the top level state of your app. So what component is at the very top level of our application?
Are they referring to the root that we're calling from, or just app.js?
Yeah, so it's app.js. That's where all the other components are rendered from. So what this is saying is that we'll want to call login, but we want to store the response object. So we're going to want to restore this at the very top level inside of app.js. So we need to store whether a user is logged in at this top level.
Okay, we'll state it.
So we're going to have to declare some state in app.nav, or not app.nav, app.js. And how are we going to do this? Let's see. Where are we at?
How deep are you when you're setting it?
So it comes down here. So it's only one level deep. So our login page is only one level deep. So in order to store the user object into app.js state, you'll need to create a class method in app.js that accepts the user object as a parameter and sets it to state. Okay, that's interesting. So let's declare some state up here. Should we create a constructor? I'm gonna just pass in props. Super props. This state equals user. Right now it's null. And instead of calling this login submit from here, we're going to want to move this login submit to the app.js. Let's look at what it says. So in order to store the user object in app.js, you need to create a class method. All right. So we can say handle login, and this.set state user equals user. Is that right? So we have this handle login that we're going to set the state to this user object that we get back from the login API.
But
But
would you need to pass it in as a parameter, or are we just setting up and getting to it in a couple steps? Because on line 22, it's pulling the user on the variable, and I'm just trying to figure if it's not pulling from this .state user, then where is that variable being declared or defined?
sorry. Yeah, it should be passed in as a prop or as an argument. But you're exactly right that we have to pass this handle login down as a property to our login component. But if we were just rendering a login component somewhere, like, I don't know, outside of this router, like login, we normally pass in props by just passing in handle login equals this dot handle login. That's how we normally pass down props when we're just rendering a component inside of its parent. But we're not actually rendering any components in here. We're using this route component and passing the login component into this component property in the route. So, and there isn't a way to do it the way it is right now, essentially. But if we keep on going down here, so passing the method into the login component does require you to use some functionality available in React Router's route component that we haven't seen before, which is the render property. So if I just take React Router DOM, look into here, so this is the documentation to React Router. If I come down here and look for the route, where is the route? Browser router. So right here in this route, this is what we're using to actually render components. If I come down here, this is the route, this is the component property that we're currently using, where, hey, at route, at the specific path, render the component called user. But there's another property called render. And render is very similar to component, except render takes in a function and returns some JSX that can also be a component. So in place of this, this needs to take in, so if we get rid of, so if I do render, and then I take in some I take in that. Let's see if this works. It might not work. And it renders, say, a component. If I refresh it, hopefully it works. My login page still works. Oh, it's because the server's not on. So this render property is in place of component property, but the render property takes in a function and returns some JSX or a component. Uh-oh, where does that say? Line 14.
Yeah, it's in your constructor.
Thank you. See right here, my login component is still able to render. So with that, I can actually extract this and create its own, let's get rid of that, render function or render login page function. So I can do const render login page.
Does that have to be inside the render function? Tom?
It could.
Outside.
I'm doing it. I'm putting it. It can be either or. But if I want access to the prop history, it needs to be in the render function. And it could work if I have it outside of it. It's just I won't have access to some of the functionality that I want to. So this render login page, I'm going to have it take in props. And then it's just going to return a component called login page. Login page. And now, just like we used to or typically pass down props from a parent component down to its child, we can literally just say handle login equals this dot handle login. And now, over here, I'm on my, so here, it's a component. Now, instead of rendering this in place of just this, I can just pass in that render login page, which is this function that when executed renders this the login page component, in addition to passing in the handle login prop function that sets a user to this parent state. So if I refresh here, everything's still working. And now, yep.
Do we need the props on line 29 to be passed in, or?
I'm going to need it. I don't think I need it when I use history, but we'll get to that in a few seconds or later on. So yeah, I guess you don't need it right now, but we might need it actually. We'll see. But like if we don't put it in there right now, it's still like everything works fine. So I'm still rendering my login page, and I want to access the props of the login page. I can actually get rid of some stuff in the login page. Like, right here, I'm just gonna console log. Let's just keep that for right now. We can get rid of that stuff later. Console log props. So when I refresh it, I can see over here, I have my handle login that's being passed down from the app.js component down into this login page component as a property. And I have this login page in a function called render login page. And I'm passing that render login page into this render property in our route. So I'm able to render the login page in addition to passing in properties down. So that way I have access to my parent state properties, methods, etc. So now when a user logs in, so tom@email.com, there it goes. Everything is still functioning the way it is supposed to, but now instead of this set username and password, in here, I want to actually dispatch or call this user's API login method. So I can get rid of this part. I can actually even get rid of that for the time being. Actually, let's just leave that there for right now. So I need to import the user API, import users API from .API users API. And now, here's my form. I need to access the input email and password in this form. So I'm just going to console log event.target. Is it pat email?
Elements.
So you can do elements, or you can actually assign a value to this input. So the name is email. This name is password. So in the name property, you can access the name property in the target and access that value. You can also grab it by the elements. I think it's easier just to give each input tag its own name and then just access that specific input tag by its name. So if I do tom@email.com and just do 1, 2, 3, I should see tom123, tom123. Great. But this credentials object that the login function needs is an object. So if I look back up here, it should look like that. That's the login credentials. So if I say let user equals, whoop, now I can just pass in event target email value. And now I can actually console log just the user, and it should just be an object. Say tom@email.com, 123. There's my email or the credentials object. Now I can actually pass that in to the user's API. So I can say, let's do an async await. Async, say let response equals await, then users API.login, and pass in that user object. So now we're right here. So I'm calling this user's API, this login, passing in that user object. It's coming to here, should do this, come out here, and then console log the response, which hopefully is a pending promise. If I do tom@email.com, 123, submit it. Uh-oh. So it looks like here's the response right here. Okay, so my thing is a little, this isn't correct. Cores, localhost, unauthorized. Oh, hold on, let me see something. I think what's the name of the credentials that I need? Because Tom isn't, so it's John Doe at Open Sesame. So if I do John Doe, Open Sesame, and click submit again, still nothing. Let's see. What if I just return?
Response says you have a cores issue. Are you on a different port?
No. Let's see what's going on. I was wondering if it was the user. So let me just change so I don't have to use that John Doe all the time. Here, where is it? Temp. Nope. Right here. So this is like a dummy server that has a couple of users in it. And I should add some more dummy users in it. .com, just so I don't have to 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Let's see if this works. All right. So if I do tom@email.com, 123, 123. Okay. So that worked, but why did it work? Let's see. Let's go back, async, let response. If I refresh, tom@email.com, 123, 123. So the response right there Now, if I do let data equals response.json and console log the data, see if this
Do you
works.
need an await?
Yep. Tom@email.com, 123, 123. So here's what I'm getting back from the data, which is okay. Like I can deal with this, but the requirements want me to send it back via a promise. So this is actually okay. This works. So this is the actual object I'm getting back from the server. It says created. Here's the time. Here's that token that's the server's creating and sending back to me. Here's the time to live, the TTL. Here's that user object and the user ID. So I can keep it like this, or I can get rid of all that and just return this. And I want to see what this looks like because I didn't get any errors with that. So I can console log the response here and see if that is in fact a pending promise on the front end in my React app. Oh, still not. I'm just going to keep it the way it was before because this is what I can deal with. This is good. So I can actually return the data. Now, if I respond with that, Tom@email 123 23. Here we go. Login page. Right there. There's my response. Does anybody have any questions about what I'm getting back from the user API?
Well, not. I guess it's partly what you're getting back and partly whether or not it's how that server's handling it. Granted, this is a long string to memorize, but each time when you're logging it in, are you getting a new token that's lasting? You know, because it's got a new timeline on it. The time to live function is the same. So even though it's like maybe 30 seconds apart to a minute apart in between, are you still getting a new token for each time you're logging in with the same user, or
Let's find out. Tom@email.com. It should be a new one. Yeah, it's a new one. It's a randomly generated one. There's probably some library that automatically generates it for you. So, yeah.
So I would think there'd be something you'd maybe set up in the server that if you're already logged in, then it just kind of like rhetorically laughs at you saying, "Oh, you're already logged in." You know, it might just update you'll keep the same token or something. I don't know what the logic would be in there,
So,
whether it just extends life or.
No, so the logic would be you'd have that token stored somewhere in the browser or on your server, or not on your server. Essentially, something like in session storage, or I hate to say local storage, but more like a cookie. You'd save that as a cookie. And so when you visit that website again, it checks that cookie, and then it sends that cookie to some database, that specific database, checks to see if that user is still logged in. And so the user will already be logged in when they visit the website. Did that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. Cool. So I have this response, and I have access to this handle login method. So now I can just await props dot handle login and pass in that response. And this response, I'm just going to call it a user because that's actually what it is. And so let's get rid of this set is logged in. We don't need this stuff anymore. We don't need a log out anymore because this whole page is kind of. But let's first see, let's console log this dot state in the app. Uh-oh, what does it say?
Duplicate let line 9 and line 13, so remove 13.
Line 9 and 13. Oh, thank you. Say user response. Pass that in there. Cool. Oh, great. Well, let me back up just so not everything is breaking. User response. And user response. All right, so if I do Tom, so right now the user is, let's clear. If I refresh it, right now the user is null, and we have that handle login. If I do tom@email.com, 123, 123, and submit it, now the user state has all that information into it at the very highest level of our app. So now the user has all that information, or the app component has the user information. So now I can actually pass that user information into other components and do some conditional rendering whether a user is logged in or not. But let's go back to new site. All right, so we have login here in the function provided to the render. Okay, we already kind of did this. It says this data can be passed down into the component that returns. Note that props.history is being passed in. Okay, so I didn't do this part. Yeah, in the login. So and this is where I'm going to be passing in props here. All right, so in the function provided, we already did that. Okay, we already did all this, the callback function, okay. Also, once I'm logged in, I want to redirect the page back to the home page by calling this.props.history.push. So after a user is logged in, I can go props.history.push, and it should reroute me to the login page or to the home page.
Are we going to throw additional logic afterwards? Because I imagine this would be on a successful login. If they didn't have the correct username or password, what would happen if would it still redirect the homepage?
Oh, email.com, the server. So yeah, it would still say user login failed. So technically a user, so there would be some logic there that we would need if a user wasn't logged in. So we can also say user response. So on the front end, actually want that on the back end. Console log data. Just quickly make some email.com. So we have an error user API. So we can say like if data.error do something like return, just say like an empty object for right now. But yeah, you'd have some error handling on the server. But we can get back to that.
Yeah, I was actually talking about the, I guess the error handling on the front end on your code would be between line 20 and 21.
Line
Because
20.
basically, as soon as we're going through this function, we would need something. If there was an error, don't refresh the page, just display any of the error messages. But if it was a success, then we go ahead and push the history. At least that's the logic I was thinking.
Yeah, you're 100% right. So first I'd send something back from the server with like an error, let's see what that looks like. Do I have what that console log looks like? If error, return like an object that says message, incorrect user name or password, and you can do like what is it? There's like another shoot. What is it? Where's my log? So down here. So error. So a status code 200. I can do error message. So yeah, I can just say like status code. I'll just say like failed. And then on the front end, I can say like if user response dot status equals failed, do something like display an error message or something like that. That's what I would do on the front end. But I'm not going to do that right now. We can get into like error handling if there's time. But that you're exactly right. You'd want error handling on the server side as well as some error handling on the front end that might display a snack bar or something that says like alert, like incorrect username or password. But for right now, email.com 123 123. Cool. So there's my user. I have used some user credentials. I've got that ID. This is that token. All right. So, and it reroutes me back to the home page. Let's go ahead. Let's see where we're at. New site. So we did all that. Once you've confirmed this, you may move on to the next step. All right. So I'm going to